thoughts, but all these other people have thoughts. And so what I'll do is I'm just going to read other people's thoughts to you, which is not what we want. We want you to think. That, part of these reasoning skills allow you to be able to give that speech on the fly that you're going to need to give at that particular time of your life when that speech matters. It's a eulogy, it's a toast, it's a job interview, whatever. Anything else? Okay. I'll run the report. While I'm running the report, you can ask questions. No, you can't do this to me. Evil. Evil turning point. Evil. Okay, we have to do this again. We're going to do this. Actually, let's do this in a few moments. I'm just going to get on with what I've got to do today. Okay, I'm in turning point. I'm going to start here. I've got another question that we'll use for attendance in a few moments. Let's talk about communication study and mediated messages. Next semester, Communication Studies Department is offering a class called Speech Communication 203, Signs, Symbols, and Society. Signs, Symbols, and Society is all about mediated messages and understanding mediated messages. Part of what we want to teach in the 101 class is we want to introduce you to the study of communication studies and everything that we do in our department. We do much more than just teach people how to speak in public. Remember, the definition of human communication is the way in which several variables, most prominently verbal and nonverbal messages, create meaning. So we're all about how to make meaning in various contexts. So we study how to make meaning within mediated context, within interpersonal, romantic, familial context, within group context, within business context, etc. We care about making meaning. So what I'm going to be talking to you about over the course of the next several weeks that we have left in class are various areas in which communication studies is used to study the process of making meaning from a variety of points of view. I'm going to start off with mediated messages, and over the course of the next 3 weeks, we're going to cover 3 topics. The first topic is media criticism. Media criticism interprets media content to reveal its reflected meaning. There's a long tradition of looking at media content to determine what its meaning is. Can anybody guess when that tradition began in earnest? Expand your definition of media. Okay? Media is not just TV. It's also books. It's also songs. It's also statues. It's also pyramids, etc., etc. The process of what was called exegesis was used by Catholic intellectuals to understand the meaning of the Bible. And it became a systematic process for understanding the meaning of God's Word as manifest in the Bible. And so the techniques that we use to engage in media criticism have their history in criticism or interpretation of the Bible, which, as you can understand, in Catholic Europe, Catholic Eurasia, or Christian Eurasia, meant a lot and mattered a lot. But what we do is we look at mediated messages, and we interpret that media content to reveal its reflected meaning. So what we really want to do is we want to maybe look at television shows or news, or today we're going to look at conspiracy theories. We're going to look at various forms of mediated content, and we're going to look at what that tells us about the culture that produced that media content. And so, in essence, we're like investigators who are using the media content as a set of clues from which we can infer basic assumptions and principles of the culture from which that media content comes. And that's what we're going to do with media criticism, and today we're going to talk about conspiracy theory in a bit. So that's one tradition. Now there are systematized methods of analyzing media content, analyzing various signs and symbols. So there's narrative theory, there's fantasy theme analysis, there's Burkean pentatic, Burkean cluster, there's Aristotelian, Neo-Aristotelian, etc., 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 etc. There are all these various means or methods by which you can analyze content to draw out its underlying meaning. And that's what you learn in Speech Communication 203. You learn how to read media from a variety of perspectives. Next is media effects. Media effects studies mediated message content and its relation to changes in beliefs, values, and behavior, which is something that you would touch upon in a class like SpeechComm 203, Signs, Symbols, and Society, but probably wouldn't focus on, because most of what you'd be focusing on in that class is criticism as opposed to effects. Although we do teach classes in media effects and in communication effects in general. So persuasion is a class largely in the effects of various messages in persuasive contexts. So it would be advertising, politics, entertainment television, face-to-face interaction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then political communication, which would study specifically persuasive messages within the context of political campaigns, et cetera. But it studies message content and its relation to changes in beliefs, values, and behavior. So the core of my research program as a scholar is I study the effect of television, political television advertising, televised political advertising. And then you can also study rhetorical industries, which studies the relationship between government, businesses, and media content. So it studies how it is that media messages get made, how it is that media organizations receive their funding, what interests are reflected in the media content, how does government regulation impact media in such a way that it shapes and influences content, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are at least 3 ways that you can study mediated messages. By no means is this exhaustive, but these are 3 large categories of studying mediated messages. And you probably touch upon a little bit of this in Signs, Symbols, and Society as well, looking at rhetorical industries and the way in which those industries create media content. And we're going to talk about that in this class. Today we're going to talk about criticism, we're going to criticize conspiracy theory. And then we're going to talk about media effects. We're going to talk about the way in which media, from a couple of theoretical perspectives, how it influences culture, how it influences beliefs, values, and behavior. And then we're going to end off talking about rhetorical industries. That is, where do our media messages come from and what interests do they reflect? Let's start off with a question that will also serve as our way to, whoops, I must not be in the right place. Oh yes, I am in the right place. All right. Identify as many conspiracy theories as you can think of. Write them down quick. You don't have to write down the whole conspiracy theory. Just write down a word that identifies it in your mind. Write down as many as you can think of. I'm going to give you another 40, well, I'm going to give you a minute and 30 seconds to do this. Write down as many as you can think of. Start now. As many as you can think of. As many conspiracy theories as you can think of. You have a minute and 30 seconds. 10 seconds has passed. As many as you can think of. About 1 minute left. Seconds.